The sun beat down on the crowded picnic tables, laughter echoing across the field. I sat at the far end, my son's plate empty, my own forgotten. A voice shouted, "Guess he's only here for the leftovers." Laughter exploded. Even family chuckled. I lowered my gaze, biting my lip. I said nothing. But my son. He slipped away. And minutes later, when the sound of whirling blades filled the sky, the same people who laughed turned pale and silent. I should have known it would happen the moment we arrived, pulling up in my old truck next to the shiny SUVs and sleek sedans lined up in the grass like silver fish. I should have known when Aunt Kelly gave me that tight, polite smile and pointed to the folding chairs behind the dumpsters instead of the main tents. I should have known when my son, bless him, clutched my hand and said he would rather just sit with me than go join the kids tossing a brand new football across the wide green field. We did not belong. Not in the way they measured belonging. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and reached for a plastic cup of lemonade, warm and buzzing with flies. It didn't matter. I was used to it. Used to the glances, the half-smirks, the way everyone's eyes slid past us like we were part of the scenery, like we were the trash cans they'd shoved us beside. My son poked at his plate with the cracked plastic fork someone had handed him, the one bent so far sideways it was barely usable. No one offered us another. No one even noticed. Not until he stood up, wiping his small hands on his jeans, and disappeared around the corner of the parking lot. I watched him go, a part of me aching to call him back, another part telling me to let him have these few moments of dignity. Maybe he wanted to find a stick. Maybe he wanted to look for bugs. Maybe he just wanted to breathe somewhere no one could laugh at him. I stayed sitting silent, the laughter swelling louder behind me like a tide. I heard my cousin's voice bragging about her daughter's college scholarship. I heard my uncle crowing about his new boat. I heard someone joke again about the boy who was here for the scraps. My boy. My heart squeezed so tightly I thought it might fold in two, but I said nothing. I sipped the lemonade. I listened. I remembered. Aunt Kelly eventually approached with a tray, fake concern plastered on her heavily powdered face. "You doing okay out here, honey? Want me to grab you something?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were cold. I smiled and shook my head. "No thanks," I said, my voice as small and polite as she wanted it to be. She clicked her tongue, almost like she was disappointed I hadn't made a scene she could gossip about later, and turned away. I sat there, hands folded, while the others devoured their grilled steaks, their thick burgers stacked with bacon and onion rings, their plates heaped high with things I hadn't been invited to bring. Across the field, children shrieked and adults sipped sparkling wine from plastic cups. I caught glimpses of matching shirts, family crests printed over chests that didn't carry my name. They had planned this, I realized. Or at least they had planned it knowing we would be the ones left out. The ones seated by the dumpsters. The ones handed the paper plates that folded under the weight of a sandwich. I wasn't mad. I was tired. Tired in my bones in a way sleep couldn't fix. Tired of pretending I didn't hear, didn't see, didn't feel. Then the noise changed. At first, it was subtle. A shift in the wind. A low vibration beneath the laughter. The kind of thing you feel before you hear. Heads started to turn. Someone shaded their eyes. Someone else dropped a fork. The laughter hiccuped and faltered. A whirring, chopping sound filled the air, growing louder by the second until it drowned out the music, the conversations, the very heartbeat of the party. I looked up, squinting against the sun, and saw the helicopter cresting the trees, sleek and black and purposeful. Panic rippled through the crowd like electricity. Who called the cops? Aunt Kelly gasped, clutching her pearls in the most dramatic way possible. Someone whispered about an accident. Someone else wondered if the mayor was making a surprise entrance. But deep down they knew. This wasn't for them. This wasn't their show. I rose slowly from my chair, my knees aching more from years of carrying burdens than from the stiff metal of the folding seat. I dusted off my jeans. I looked toward the parking lot where my son had disappeared. The helicopter hovered lower now, the wind from the blades flattening the picnic decorations and sending paper plates skittering across the grass. People screamed and scrambled, covering their food, shielding their eyes, shouting over each other. It should have felt chaotic. It should have felt terrifying. But to me, it felt quiet. Perfectly, beautifully quiet. A few feet away, Aunt Kelly turned to me, her mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. She tried to speak, tried to ask something, but for once, she found no words. I smiled, just a little. A tiny, private smile. Because I knew. I knew who was coming. I knew what was about to happen. And for the first time all day, it wasn't their story anymore. It was mine. The helicopter dipped lower, kicking up dust and shredded napkins, landing just beyond the picnic area. Men in crisp uniforms stepped out, moving in perfect formation. And at the front of them, standing proud, was someone small, someone they had laughed at, someone they thought they could erase with cracked plates and cruel jokes. My son. And he wasn't alone. He was leading them. Straight toward us. I took a deep, steadying breath as my heart pounded once, twice, against my ribs, and held it. Because the next words out of their mouths wouldn't be laughter. They would be apologies. Or maybe they would be silence. Either way, it didn't matter. Everything was about to change. I used to tell myself that love was enough. That if I kept showing up, kept bringing gifts, kept smiling through the way they sat me at the kids' table or forgot my name in invitations, eventually they would see me. Maybe they would even love me back. It sounds foolish now, standing here with the dust settling and the helicopter blades still spinning in my memory. But back then, it was survival. It was hope. I learned early what it meant to be the afterthought. I was the kid who sat quietly while my cousins tore open birthday presents, who clapped the loudest when someone else won the spelling bee, who went home with leftover cake in a dented box if there was any left. I grew up believing if I didn't cause trouble, if I didn't ask for too much, there might be a place for me somewhere at the edge of the picture. So I smiled. I stayed small. I swallowed every slight and every cold shoulder like bitter medicine, trusting that someday it would cure me of loneliness. When I found out I was pregnant with my son, I thought everything would change. I thought bringing a new life into the world would finally earn me a seat at the table. They came to the baby shower, sure. They brought onesies and diaper cakes and balloons. They patted my shoulder and called me brave, called me strong, but their eyes were tight with judgment. No ring on my finger. No husband standing proudly beside me. Just me, big and hopeful and so naive it still makes me ache. They took pictures, they posted them online, but they never asked how I was getting home or if I needed help assembling the crib. I built that crib myself, one shaky hand balancing the instructions while the other tightened screws. No one showed up when my water broke at 2 in the morning. No one brought flowers to the hospital. It was just me and my boy, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, both of us learning how to hold on with no safety net. Still, I kept showing up. Every Easter, every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July barbecue, I packed up potato salads and cookies made from scratch and drove across town. I wore my best clothes. I taught my son to say please and thank you, to smile even when the jokes were at our expense. I watched as other children received crisp $100 bills for report cards, while my son got a polite nod for winning a science fair. I bit my tongue until it bled when someone laughed about single moms being drains on the family. I laughed along when Uncle Mark joked that at least I brought good dessert, even if I didn't bring much else to the table. I told myself it didn't matter. That he was joking. That it was fine. One Christmas, my son made handmade gifts for everyone. Little wood carvings he had spent weeks perfecting in secret. He wrapped them carefully in colored paper and proudly placed them under the tree. On Christmas morning, I watched him beam with excitement as the packages were opened. I watched that beam falter as one by one, people barely glanced at the carvings before setting them aside like trash. No thank yous. No hugs. Just awkward smiles and a quick shift to shinier presents. My son sat very still after that, his small fists clenched in his lap. That was the first time I saw it. The first time I saw that quiet withdrawal, that little wall start to build behind his eyes. It killed something inside me I had been trying so desperately to keep alive. I stayed quiet, because that was what I was taught. Good girls stayed quiet. Good mothers taught their children to accept what they were given. Good family members did not start fights at Christmas. So I kissed my son's forehead that night and whispered how proud I was of him. I told him that love was not measured in thank yous or shiny toys. I told him it was okay. I told him it didn't mean anything. But I lied. It meant everything. It always had. Over time, he stopped asking why we never got real invitations. Stopped asking why his name was misspelled on the party banners or why his birthday was always forgotten when others had whole feasts thrown for them. He learned faster than I ever did that sometimes blood is not enough to earn you a place. I thought maybe if I just held on longer, if I stayed patient, he would be spared the hurt. I thought love and patience could shield him. But love does not build armor. It builds the heart. And hearts break. I remember a night, not so long ago, when I found him in bed, flashlight tucked under his chin, sketching something furiously in a notebook. He didn't see me at first. I stood there for a moment, watching the way his brows knit together in concentration, the quick, sure movements of his pencil. When he finally noticed me, he blushed and tried to hide the notebook. I sat beside him and asked what he was working on. He hesitated, then showed me. It was a design for a mechanical device, something I couldn't even fully understand at the time. Lines and gears and measurements I had no words for. I told him it was brilliant. He ducked his head and whispered, "I want to make something important, Mom. Something people can't ignore." I hugged him so tightly that night it must have hurt. But he only laughed, soft and shy against my shoulder. I didn't know then what he would do with those sketches. Didn't know he was sending them off into the world, entering competitions without telling me, chasing something bigger than this small, painful world we had been trapped in. All I knew was that he had a spark inside him that I could never let them snuff out. So when the helicopter blades cut through the air today, when the dust rose and the tables toppled and the champagne glasses shattered against the grass, I understood. I understood in a way I never had before. He wasn't just leaving the picnic. He was leaving the whole damn table. The table that had never made room for us. The table that had always been set for someone else. He was building a new one, somewhere they would have to beg for a seat. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't trying to shrink myself to fit into a chair they didn't even want me sitting in. I stood up, straight and steady, as my son walked toward us with the men in black suits behind him. And when Aunt Kelly gasped and clutched her pearls again, when Uncle Mark stumbled back, when the whole field of neatly dressed relatives froze like statues, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was over. The waiting. The begging. The hoping. We were done asking for crumbs. We were ready to fly. And as my son raised his hand to signal something I couldn't yet see, the helicopter's door opened wider. A new figure stepped out, briefcase in hand, and all the color drained from Aunt Kelly's face. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't just recognition. It was reckoning. The figure stepping out of the helicopter wore a sharp black suit, polished shoes gleaming even in the churned-up dust of the field. He carried himself with the kind of calm authority that made people straighten their spines without even realizing it. The chatter died completely. The music stuttered and cut off. The man held a thick leather briefcase in one hand and a small plaque in the other, its gold surface flashing once in the bright sun. My son walked just a step ahead of him, his chin high, his little hands clenched but steady. I took a step forward too, not out of fear or habit, but because I finally understood. I had spent so long trying to keep us close to people who only knew how to push us away. I had been teaching my son to shrink, to stay polite, to stay grateful for scraps. But he had learned a different lesson. He had learned to build his own table. The suited man approached the group without hesitation, stopping just shy of the picnic tables that were now half empty, half abandoned by the guests trying to look invisible. Aunt Kelly still clutched her pearls, her mouth working silently. Uncle Mark hovered behind a cooler, his face red and sweaty. The rest of the family stood frozen, waiting for someone else to explain what was happening. The man opened the briefcase with a soft click and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed in gold foil. Then he looked directly at my son and smiled. Not a patronizing smile, not a pitying one. A real smile, like he was looking at someone important. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we are honored to present the Innovation Rising Star Award to one of the brightest young inventors we have encountered this year. His work in sustainable energy prototypes for rural communities has not only caught the attention of our board, but has secured him a full scholarship grant and mentorship program, effective immediately." He turned, extending the plaque toward my son, who took it with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then the man continued, as if the entire field had not just shifted under everyone's feet. "This young man, despite considerable adversity, submitted designs and documentation far beyond what we usually see, even at the collegiate level. His work will be featured at our national conference next month, and we are honored to help foster his education and future contributions." He paused, scanning the faces of the guests, almost daring someone to say otherwise. Then he crouched slightly to my son's level and asked in a softer voice, "Are you ready for your next adventure?" My son nodded, his eyes bright. I felt my own throat tighten, a lump I could not swallow. He had done this. Not because they lifted him up, but because he refused to let them keep him down. The man rose and gestured toward the helicopter. The invitation was clear. It was time to leave. But before we could move, another figure darted forward. It was my cousin, the one who had laughed the hardest earlier. She pushed her sunglasses up onto her head and plastered a wide, trembling smile across her face. "Wait," she called, reaching out toward my son like she had always been proud, like she had always seen him. "We were just kidding earlier. You know that, right? We're all so proud of you, sweetie. You're amazing. You're one of us." I watched my son pause, the plaque clutched tightly to his chest. I saw the way his shoulders tensed. The way he looked at me, just for a heartbeat, as if asking permission. And I shook my head. Barely. But enough. He turned back to the suited man and said in a clear, strong voice, "Thank you, sir. I'm ready." No glance back. No apology. No polite smile to make them feel better about what they had tried to crush in him. The suited man nodded approvingly and placed a guiding hand on his back. Together they walked toward the helicopter, its blades spinning slow and steady like a heartbeat. I followed, my steps sure. I did not offer hugs or goodbyes. I did not explain myself. I did not carry anyone's shame but my own, and today, for once, I had none. We climbed aboard, the seats soft and cool against my overheated skin. The door closed with a firm, final thud. Through the tinted windows, I watched the family scatter, some waving weakly, some already pulling out phones to text or call or spin their version of what had just happened. I leaned back, letting the vibration of the engine hum through my bones. My son looked up at me, his face radiant. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the worry underneath. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in years. "I'm perfect," I said. "Better than perfect." The helicopter lifted off the ground, the earth shrinking beneath us. The tables, the banners, the faces, all of it became smaller, less important, less real. I watched as the family turned into colorful dots, scrambling around their picnic tables, their laughter now just a ghost of a memory. They could not reach us here. They never would again. The man in the suit handed my son a folder as we gained altitude, explaining the next steps, the opportunities ahead. I listened but also let my mind drift. I thought about the cracked paper plates still sitting on that folding chair. I thought about every time they had laughed at us, diminished us, ignored us. And I realized something stunning. They had done us a favor. In pushing us out, they had freed us. I turned back to my son, who was now poring over the folder with a fierce, bright focus. My chest swelled with something bigger than pride. It was hope. It was power. It was the certainty that we were never going to be anyone's afterthought again. And just as I settled into that beautiful certainty, the man leaned over one more time and said something that made my heart jolt all over again. "There's one more thing we didn't mention in front of the others," he said, his voice pitched low. "Your son's design? It's already being considered for national patenting. We'll need you both to come to a private meeting next week. You're about to have more choices than you ever dreamed of." I blinked, the world tilting anew. A future opening wider than I had ever dared to imagine. And for the first time in my life, I realized we were just getting started. The days after the picnic passed like a dream I was almost afraid to wake from. No more folding chairs by dumpsters. No more cracked plates. No more measuring my worth by how many scraps they decided to toss my way. The apartment we moved into was small but clean, full of sunlight and fresh air and the hum of new beginnings. My son had his own desk now, a real one, not the corner of the kitchen table. His sketches lined the walls, pinned up with the kind of pride neither of us had ever been allowed before. And when he worked with a fire in him that nothing and no one could touch anymore. I found myself watching him sometimes, my heart breaking and mending all at once, thinking how foolish I had been to ever believe we needed their approval to be whole. The calls and messages started almost immediately after we left. Aunt Kelly, suddenly syrupy sweet, leaving voicemails about how proud they all were, how they had always known my son was special. Uncle Mark texting blurry photos from the picnic, pretending he had been the one who encouraged my boy from the start. Cousins I had not heard from in years sending friend requests, their profiles filled with hollow congratulations and subtle hints at future get-togethers. I read every message once, then deleted them. I answered no calls. There was nothing left to say. Let them tell whatever stories they needed to sleep at night. We were not part of them anymore. One afternoon, as the sun slanted warm and golden through our new windows, my son found the old picnic plate crumpled at the bottom of a moving box. He held it up, frowning, turning it over in his hands like he was trying to understand what it was. I watched him for a moment, then took it gently from him. Without a word, I dropped it into the trash. He smiled, small and knowing, and went back to his work without a backward glance. Some things are not worth saving. Some memories are not worth the space they take up. Our lives settled into a quiet rhythm that tasted like freedom. I found a job at a local non-profit, using skills I had almost forgotten I had, and for the first time, I worked somewhere that valued more than a polished last name. My son started meeting with mentors, sitting in conference rooms with engineers and CEOs who listened when he spoke. He was growing into himself, into a future he had carved with his own hands. And every time he walked into a room now, he carried himself like someone who knew he belonged there. Not because someone else had allowed it, but because he had earned it. There were moments, late at night, when doubt tried to creep back in. When I wondered if we should have fought harder to be included, if cutting ties so cleanly had been too harsh. But those moments passed like storms breaking against a strong roof. I had spent too many years trying to squeeze us into spaces that had no room for us. I would not drag us back into smallness now. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights blink on like fireflies, my son turned to me, his face thoughtful. "Mom," he said, "do you think they ever think about us? About what they did?" I considered the question carefully, feeling the cool air brush against my skin, hearing the hum of traffic far below. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe they do. Maybe they tell themselves stories where they were kind. Maybe they believe it. People have a way of forgetting the parts that make them uncomfortable." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then he smiled, a real, easy smile, and leaned his head against my shoulder. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." We sat there a long time, just breathing in the night, letting it fill the spaces where old wounds used to be. I thought about the years I had lost chasing scraps of affection. The laughter I had swallowed. The apologies that had never come. And I realized that forgiveness wasn't something you gave for them. It was something you gave yourself. A way of setting down a heavy load you had carried long enough. They said we didn't belong. They said it in every small dismissal, every mocking smile, every cold shoulder turned away. But they were wrong. We belonged somewhere better. Somewhere we were seen. Somewhere we were enough. I didn't need a public apology. I didn't need a parade. I didn't even need an acknowledgement. The quiet, steady heartbeat of our new life was louder and stronger than any of their hollow celebrations. As I closed my eyes and leaned back into the chair, I felt it. Not anger. Not triumph. Just peace. They handed us broken pieces. And we built wings. And we never looked back.